So this is from Mother Jones. North Dakota's Norway experiment. Can human prisons work in America? A red state aims to find out. So what happened, they started taking people who run prisons in the United States over to Norway to show them how that works. And you think that would change them? Well, let's go to the article. The Norway sojourn was a brainchild of Donald Specter, executive director of the Prison Law Office, a California public interest law firm. In 2011, while visiting European prisons with a group of Maryland college students, Specter was struck by how profoundly the experience altered their views on incarceration. He decided to use some of the legal fees his office had won in its lawsuits against California prisons to bring state corrections chiefs, judges, and lawmakers on similar journeys. So here's two of those people from North Dakota. North Dakota prison officials Leanne Bertsch and Carrie Ann Jackson. So they're hard-nosed, they run prisons. They're women who get to the top of the prison, and so you know they're what they call ball busters, right? Real hard-nosed, ballsy. These are the terms they use in the article. So they took them to Norway. And what was their experience? Bertsch had been in charge of North Dakota's Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, which includes 4 adult prisons and 1 juvenile facility, for more than a decade. And Jackson had spent 7 years as director of correctional practices. But in Oslo that evening, Bertsch was uncharacteristically emotional. It was definitely one of those moments where you're rethinking everything. They'd left Bismarck feeling pretty good about their system, which prided itself on its human practices and commitment to rehabilitation. But now, sitting in the glassed-in bar at a Radisson hotel with its view of Oslo fjord, Bertsch began to cry. We're hurting people. That's the head of the prisons in North Dakota started to cry, saying we're hurting people, because they thought they were helping people. Back to the article. I'd always thought that we run a good system. We're decent, we don't abuse people, we run safe facilities with good programs. It was like, how did we think it was okay to put human beings in cage-like settings? Scandinavian prisons tend to elicit eye rolls from law and order types weaned on the punitive American model. Yet a growing number of state correctional officials are coming to the realization that our approach is ineffective, costly, and cruel. For instance, Fred Patrick, director of the Center on Sentencing and Corrections at the Vera Institute of Justice, cites the nation's staggering recidivism rate. 77% of inmates released from state prisons are rearrested within 5 years. Once you realize that this system isn't working well, it's fairly easy to pivot to, how do we do something different? And that is where Specter's field trips come in. To be so freaking optimistic that you think you can take some knuckle-dragging corrections guy like me over there and it's going to change their perspective, you have to be a hippie to think that, says Wetzel, who toured German prisons with Specter in 2013. But Specter's ploy worked. It really screws you up because it changes you, Wetzel says. I joked around with Don Specter. I'm like, fuck you, man. I can't believe you did this shit to me. And so when Bertsch and Jackson returned home, it was with a radical new goal: to implement our humanity. The Norwegian principle of dynamic security posits that warm relationships between inmates and staff reduce the potential for violence. American prisons typically try to create safe conditions by means of oppressive rules and random searches and the threat of additional punishment. Transitioning from one approach to the other requires a profound paradigm shift and the ability to sell frontline prison workers on a brand new mindset. How do you get somebody who thinks they're in law enforcement to figure out you need to be more of an empath, more of a social worker, a friend, and a mentor, Jackson asks. The correction officers I met at the state penitentiary, ex-military, all of them, weren't outwardly hostile to the idea of cultivating relationship with prisoners, but it clearly didn't come natural to them. For that reason, perhaps, the brass created a mandate. Guards in the segregation unit must have at least 2 conversations per shift with each of their inmates under their supervision. Isn't that amazing? What that's talking about is solitary confinement. They're talking about segregation unit, that's solitary confinement. And so now they have this rule where you have to have 2 conversations with your prisoner each shift. Holy F. You mean you're going to humanize the prisoner to the guard? That could be dangerous. They might start treating them like human beings.
It's just crazy because we've made so many leaps with our technology. You know, we've made so many advancements, but here we are, our prison systems are so cruel and punitive by design. It's just designed by people who say, you know what? I want to make sure you pay the price for being a criminal. It's just so backward. It's so sad.
Steve talked about all the perverted incentives that we have in our criminal justice system. So let me get a little bit more of this and then we'll talk about it. It's worth a shot, a correction officer named Josh Hedrum told me. What we were doing before wasn't working. So that's what they're doing in Norway. And now they're trying to show people in the United States. So even hardcore people who run prisons, who think they're doing a good job, find out they're not. They're actually hurting people, and they're actually destroying families and breaking up communities and making it harder for people to get back into society. Because the way they look at it in Norway is that every person who's in a jail is gonna be somebody's neighbor one day. And you gotta get them ready to be someone's neighbor. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this clip. There's a whole hour and a half of aggressive progressives waiting for you at the Young Turks Network. Become a member and get access to all the content.